I'm delighted to see all of you who've been kind enough to canoe your way to the museum today to hear our author debrief. Before we get started, should go without saying, but just in case, and I've been guilty of this myself, please silence cell phones or other devices. You'll probably be happier having them off anyway. We have a real treat here today. We're going to hear today from Professor Emil Draitser, who's actually born in Odessa, Ukraine. He's published both fiction and nonfiction since 1965, and under his pen name Emil when he was in the Soviet Union, his work appeared in a number of leading journals in the Soviet Union, such as Izvestia, Literary Gazette, and Krokodil. He began his writing career actually as a freelancer in a field of writing that required a lot of courage in the Soviet Union, and that was satire. And perhaps not surprisingly, this rather dangerous business eventually got him blacklisted for getting on the wrong side of an important official, prompting him to leave the Soviet Union in, I believe, 1974. 75 saw him in Los Angeles, where he went to school, went to UCLA, earned a PhD in Russian literature, and in the 1980s he became a professor at Hunter College in New York City, where he works today. His first book published in the United States in 1980 was Forbidden Laughter, Soviet Underground Humor, which got him national attention. He's appeared on NPR, NBC News with Tom Brokaw, and best of all, as far as I'm concerned, The Merv Griffin Show. Currently, Emil, I believe, is working on the sequel to his memoirs, but today we're here to discuss his latest work, Stalin's Romeo Spy. And let me also mention, while I'm thinking of it here, that after the talk, Professor Draitser has agreed to answer your questions and will also be available to sign his book. Now, quite a lot is known, of course, about the operations of Soviet intelligence during World War II and the interwar period. That said, I think Emil has really come up with something new and interesting with this book, filling in the colorful details on someone who was known to exist, but about whom very little information was actually previously available. Stalin's Romeo Spy, I think, is also a timely work. Our hero today, or at any rate our protagonist, we'll see if he comes out as a hero or not, but our protagonist today is Dmitry Bystrolyotov, one of the great Soviet illegals. Illegals, you'll recall, are those intelligence officers who take on new identities and embed themselves in the societies of whatever country they intend to spy on, often living in these countries for many, many years. And as we all remember from this summer's headlines, this is a technique that intelligence services based in Moscow still use. However, again, from reading the newspapers this summer, while today illegals may set themselves up in real estate as travel agents or consultants, in an earlier era, one of them at least, lived what can only be described as a swashbuckling life that we'll hear about today. Now, swashbuckling is not your typical Soviet quality. However, in one regard, Bystrolyotov, his story is very typically Soviet, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that too. As we'll hear, this is a man who provided great services to the Soviet state, and yet found himself purged and in the Gulag, and spent years there and then years more before he was officially rehabilitated as a result of Khrushchev's policies. It's a fascinating story. As I say, we are indeed fortunate to have Professor Draitser here to share it with us today, and I'll turn it over to him. Professor Draitser, welcome.
Thank you for your kind introduction, and of course, many thanks for anyone who made your way through this hurricane. I don't think it's a KGB working, but you never know. I have to say that in my wildest dreams, I never thought I would ever write a book about a spy. But sometimes it happens with writers that the subject matter chooses the writer, not vice versa. And that's what happened to me through a series of very strange kinds of circumstances in which I would now like to open up with and explain how the whole thing happened. I should probably push something. Yeah. All right. This is September 11, no connection, of course, with the one we know, 73. I am in Moscow, not even thinking about immigration yet, although it's already started trickling. Holding on, I was doing interesting work. I was working as a freelancer writing satirical columns for Moscow press. And I got a phone call from my father-in-law. At that time I was married about 9 months or so. And my father-in-law worked as a tailor in a tailor shop of the Minister of Defense. And he says to me, look, one of my customers wants to talk to you. I say, your customer? You want to talk to me? Why he wouldn't to talk to me? Well, I was not completely surprised that somebody wanted to talk to me, because when you're a freelance journalist writing satirical pieces, sometimes people call me saying, hey, we have this bureaucracy, maybe it's a good story for you and so on. Not completely surprised, but not from Minister of Defense. What's ever happened to me. So I said, so who is he? What he wants? He says, I have no idea. It just, he asked me to give you his telephone number and call. So I called. Very pleasant, cultured man's voice was the other end of the telephone, and he asked me, would you be kind to come over to my place? I'm on Prospect Vernadsky in Moscow, and it was like two stops from me. I lived at that time in Akademicheskaya, they stopped there. And I decided what I'm going to lose. I was intrigued. Why somebody wants to talk to me that kind of mysteriously, does not explain what it's for, and so on and so forth. I came, and this is the man, what you see here. This is the photograph. I didn't take any photos. This is photo of 1973 that later on, and I'll tell you how it happened, and his step-grandson gave me this photo. And what you see on the right is my photo from my press card. The moment I entered the room, he asked me, I assume you have a press card on you? And that's what I showed him. So that's why I thought it would be interesting for you to see. And we sat down and he started talking. Basically, he wouldn't call it an interview because mostly he talked. I tried to figure out why he's talking to me. I devote the last part of my book afterwards to try to explain so many years later how I understood why he was talking. Because on the surface of it, why he wanted to talk to a journalist who writes satirical and humorous pieces, that's what I was writing. This, I'm sure, as a pro, he immediately found out from my talkative father-in-law when he was doing his, trying his suit. So, but the reason he told me right in the beginning, and then sort of we didn't come up to it, he said, well, I believe it would be good material to you and me together to write a novel based on my life and so on. But when he started talking to me, I was overwhelmed. Now I wanted to remind you that in 1973 it was still dangerous to publish anything about KGB operations in the West, especially against countries that were officially not enemies of the Soviet Union at the time. I'm talking about Great Britain, France, that's where he and so on. Secondly, to tell me how he was tortured when he was at the KGB, to tell me how he survived through Gulag. At that time, I want to again remind you, and this is the year when Solzhenitsyn was expelled from the country for publishing Archipelago Gulaga in the West. So it was a rather dangerous time. Why he took this risk and talked to me, I guessed, and I made an intelligent guess again at the end of my book. But here is why I came home after evening spending with him. This is what we had tea. I just found a cup of tea. That's exactly an old man. That's how we look. He offered me a cup of tea with some jam, and so that's what the evening we were all about in a tiny little apartment. And then when I came home, what you see is notes from my notebook. I came home, and you probably will be amused to see that actually there is here, the stationery, more flawed. You see this? Anyone who lived in Soviet Union at that time know what the shortage of good stationery was. So why my friend who worked for Morflot gave me something that he got, of course, made, printed abroad and so on. So I used it. Anyway, just as a side note. So I wrote it, but now pay attention that over here, everything I wrote, everything in pen. But his name, just in case, I wrote in pencil. I thought, God knows what, if something comes up, I'll erase it. That's how I felt about it. I was not sure, what can I do possibly with it? Why he talked to me and so on. Anyway, there was no more meetings between me and him. And then I don't know, somebody suggested that the order could be shifted. Anybody here? Because it looks like the order was shifted. Usually it is not. So I apologize. Could somebody help me? Because I need... No, I'll order. If I see them on display, I can pick them. You know, that's all. I apologize. Because just a folder. No, I wanted to pick because there's definitely it's pick the what I saw right now before. Yeah. Okay. See, it's all mixed up. So if I want to choose, I can choose this one. Yeah. Okay. I want to just be sure. Yes. Okay. Yes, then I'll probably be able to. The technology, despite all success, is still unpredictable, I have to say. Usually it runs no problem with one after another, but here it's... Okay. How did this happen? Now, I have it on the slideshow, but it's... Can I slow down or do it? I have it separately on slideshow already in order if necessary. Yes, I have it here. Yes, I have it in my car, but I wanted to be sure. You see, it's automatically shifted. I want to be automatically. Yeah, because otherwise I'll take your time just to find the proper one. So let's get out of here. Yeah. Yeah, just 1 second. I should be able to. Yeah, let me see. See, can we? This one we probably will help us. 1 second. Sure, like this one, for example. Can we run this one? But not. No, it's automatically. It is on show. It is set. But can we? Yeah. This one I want to run, but not to have it. It's the show. No? Okay. Or Romeo Spy PowerPoint. Yeah, let's try this one. Okay. Yes, that's the order. I hope so. I never know. Now, what we should approve this one? Okay. Here we are. Okay. Well, I apologize because what can I say? Technology is tricky. Anyway, a year after I met with Stralyotov, a year after that, I found myself wanted to get out of the country as soon as possible. Decided to immigrate. In order to do so, you will have to apply for visa. You have to bring your papers to the Dutch embassy in Moscow. What you see here is the entrance of the door. In order to receive your visa going from Russia to first Austria, to Vienna, and then whatever your choice, Israel or Italy if you go to the United States of America. Now, I was also told when you're there, you can some papers, you want to do whatever you want to take out of the country, you can give it to them and they will take it out by diplomatic pouches. That was the rumor at least. So I went there with a small briefcase which had everything including these notes. I stood in line, I was nervous, needless to say. This is the first time I tried to leave the country. Needless to say, it's a life-changing experience for anyone who lived at that time in the Soviet Union, never being abroad. Some men in line, there was a line about 20 people, started a conversation with me. How things going? What do you have? And I told him again because I was nervous. Yeah, I have my literary notes. I need to send. And this man, all of a sudden, motions the policeman who was in front of it. They both come up to me. He was just a stool pigeon for the KGB, and they took me as I am, to Moscow. Here's, I can show, the embassy right here. So they took me all around here to Suvorovsky Boulevard, which is next to the House of Journalists, which I attended. There was some other courtyard and a little room, a little room with the door locked. So anyway, they brought me in and they kept me there for 3 hours, saying, "We'll wait for the KGB representative to come down to see what you're trying to smuggle out of the country." It was not the best 3 hours of my life, I can assure you. Not the jolliest. I waited and waited, I didn't know what to wait. Anyway, finally, captain of KGB came in. I immediately recognized him because obviously in his civilian clothes, he spent many evenings in the cafe of this House of Journalists. I assume this was his field of expertise. And he started to look through what I had. Maybe because of my handwriting, it was not the best in the world. He just looked through, read some type material that was not interesting. He said, no. You just have to take it to the Glablit, which is the censorship committee, and they have to stamp every page and then get out of the country. That's it. And they let me go. When I got out, after a while, I was able to come to my senses, and I called my brother, who lived I lived in Moscow at that time, and he lived with my family, with my mother and father in Odessa, and I told him, they're planning to go also like in a year after me. I say, okay, here is my notes. He sent it to him and say, you go there when you get for a visa, you stay in line, and you don't talk to anyone. Understood? Yes. And that's how it happened. He went there, and after a while, when he joined me, I was already in Los Angeles, he brought me everything, including these notes. And again, I would not ever to think, oh, among all these notes about very strange evening with a very interesting but strange man and so on. Until we're talking about 25 years later. In the summer of 2002, one of my books, a collection of short stories, it comes out in a publishing house, small publishing house in California. I go there, we have dinner with the publisher, Dr. Gary Kern, who himself published a couple of books, one on death in Washington about Krivitsky, a KGB officer who defected to the West, and then later on he worked already on other book came out on Kravchenko, another Soviet defector. Anyway, just to keep conversation going, I asked him, I knew that he is also a writer, so what are you writing about now? And at that time he was working on a book on Krivitsky. He said, I'm writing a biography of a Soviet spy back defected in the West and to the West. I say, well, I also in my life, I said, just to keep conversation going, met a man who was a Soviet spy in the West. And he said, what was his name? I said, Dmitry Bystrolyotov. What? You met Dmitry Bystrolyotov? Yes. And you have notes? Yes, I have notes. Oh my God. You must publish your, everything about the meeting with him. You are part of his biography. See, all of a sudden I became part of somebody else's biography. I had no choice. You have to do it. I said, why or what? No. You must do it. He's an outstanding Soviet operative. He's a legend. You have to. He's the great illegal and all of the things. He said that I didn't know fully what he understands. But then gradually I started to look through the internet, trying to locate what is then Bystrolyotov, what is known about him. Needless to say, of course, I read whatever was published by Western scholars about Bystrolyotov. There is a chapter on great illegals in the book by Andrew Mitrokhin, where they talk about Bystrolyotov among the most outstanding spies. There is some paragraphs in other books about him, but not much than that. But then I went and decided, well, I found there is a book published by Dmitry Bystrolyotov, the Travel to the Age of Night. I obviously grabbed the book and read. And there were so many things in the book that I couldn't believe. It was simply unbelievable. That I got extremely interested and decided I have to get to the bottom of it. And by the way, I saw actually the foreword was written by Sergei Milashov, a relative of his, a surviving step-grandson. And so I contacted him through, again, finding his name and so on. He invited me to come to Moscow, and that's how I got hold of much material of it. But by that time, today I told this episode, when I started looking through the papers of Bystrolyotov, I found his telephone book. On the first page, Abramov is my name and my telephone number at that time. And all of a sudden I said, my God, 25 years like that. So I felt I was curious to find out what's going on. And that brought me, of course, first to Prague, because he spent first 5 years of his career as an operative in Prague, and then to other places, Great Britain and Italy and Switzerland, and on and on and on. So what I'm going to show you now is briefly what, in summation, first of all, why the great illegals were needed in the beginning of the 1930s. This is a map of Europe before beginning of World War I. And you see Austria-Hungary, Russia, Germany, France, and so on. Now, how the map looked immediately after the end of World War I. You see a bunch of new countries appeared on the map, including Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Baltic countries, and others. So in other words, completely different makeup of the countries. What was the result? What was going on at that time? We're talking about, first of all, Wall Street crash in 1929, the coming to power of extremist groups, fascist in Italy, and then Hitler is coming to power. Then, on the other hand, there is a Soviet Union, and most European countries don't know how to handle Soviet Union, because the official policy of the Soviet Union at that time was export of revolution. And it is known that both Hitler and Mussolini used this policy in order to frighten the population against the Red Menace coming and so on. So therefore, was a lot of nervousness among the European leaders of European countries and very intensive diplomatic activities. And Czechoslovakia, as you can see, is a wedge, the forepost to all these countries of interest for the Soviet Union. So they used the trade mission in Prague as a forepost and for these activities of intelligence activities. Czechoslovakia by itself at that time was prospering and was by itself a target for military and for technological, especially high-tech information and so on. And so this is the Villa Teresa. I took a picture when I was visiting Prague. It's still there, and that's how it looks like. Now, in 1925, Bystrolyotov, we don't have time to go through all of it. I spent almost 3 chapters of my book calling this part Making of a Spy. I asked myself a question: what made Bystrolyotov to become a spy, and needless to say, regret about it by the end of his life? A number of his personal circumstances. First of all, he came to Prague as part of refugees running from after the end of the civil war in Russia, from Constantinople, from Turkey, to Prague. Masaryk, president of Czechoslovakia at that time, wanted to help these brother Slavs with the so-called Russian Action, a program of helping these young refugees, especially to give them some scholarship they could attend school. So he was completely destitute, and that's the picture of him in 1921. What is amazing that in his personal archive, so many pictures preserved. When he was arrested, they didn't do a thorough job. So much of it remained, and what you will see today is from his personal archive, some of them never published. So this is how he looked when he arrived to Prague in 1921. And this is a dormitory that I picture now, which is the same dormitory in Strašnice where he was there. Now, by personal circumstances, he was extremely homesick. Many, of course, Russian immigrants felt homesick, and it's only natural parting with their native land. But in his particular case, because he was practically abandoned from age 3 to 13. His mother was a suffragist. She didn't want to the baby was not necessary for her. She just wanted to make a statement that she can have a baby. So he was brought up by aristocratic family, foster family, which was paid for, and he basically he never saw his father. There are some claims that he's from Tolstoy clan. No evidence whatsoever. I'm not saying he's lying, but no evidence today this is true. And his mother saw him only a couple of times a year, with giving him sometimes literally painful lessons in social justice, because she was one of those activists who felt that social justice is much more important, quite in the tradition of Russian culture, than your personal well-being, your personal being. So he was homesick twice. In other words, this is important why he was recruited, because for him, motherland spelled also mother. Okay? Motherland. Even better works in English to understand than in Russian, because Russian is Rodina and Mat and so on. Although obviously. Now, he received also aristocratic upbringing, and when he was vetted out and brought to counterintelligence office in Moscow in 1925, and briefed by Artuzov, at that time the head of the counterintelligence, they decided, since he had the aristocratic upbringing, we'll send him, as they say, paverham. We will send him to the upper layers of the Western society in order to work for us. And he knew several languages. He received aristocratic upbringing at home, so he knew French, English, and German, and he also finished the gymnasium, like a high school at that time. And the least, but really important, quality, he had good looks. So one of his first assignments was to really use these qualities of him and seduce one of the women who worked for a French embassy in Prague. And this is his, Artuzov I just told you about, this head of counterintelligence who vetted him. His immediate spy master was Nikolai Samsonov actually, I don't know why he called Samsonov, who was at the embassy, sorry. And then later on he was replaced with Pavel Zhorovyov. They were legals, in other words, they had some official post at the trade mission, but what they have done, they guided the people like him. Now, this is the Bristol-Leather's targets in the years in Prague. As I said, Czechoslovakian cutting-edge technology. There was a white emigre-run spy school in Prague that he had to penetrate, and got a list of all people who planned to go back to Russia. And this is his first conquest as a Romeo spy, this young woman, Marie-Hélène Couturier, who was a typist at the French embassy, and this is her code name, La Roche, and I don't have time to explain here, but in the book, why in his memoir he calls her Countess Fiorella Imperiale. It was not a whim, it was all pre-designed Aesopic language, more in the book, we don't have time for it. Now in 1930 he was, after some setbacks, he was ready to go back to Russia. He wanted to really go back because he was a talented artist, and he wanted to be a writer also, probably still claiming the word, thinking that he will get back the name of Tolstoy at that time and so on. Nevertheless, he wanted to go back. But he was convinced to stay and become illegal. That means to go underground under assumed name, assume other personality and so on. And he was, he doesn't say they made it explicitly, but it was clear that if he really wants to help his mother/motherland, he has to do what motherland calls for. So now back to again the map of Europe at that time. The extreme intensity of diplomatic activities, and that means a lot of spies working for different countries. And one of the prime targets for Stalin, for example, at the time he already came to power, was to read diplomatic mail of Western countries. For that, you have to have diplomatic codes and ciphers. And that was his target. So he is given following spy master. Boris Bazarov has illegal residency in Berlin. In Theodore Mali has legal residency in Paris. And they are given a task to provide, at that time, foreign intelligence, at that time still OGPU, of to get this information for him. And the head of the foreign intelligence at that time was Abram Slutsky in Moscow, the center, as they call it in the correspondence. And that's how now you will see Bystrolyodov's briefly alias and covers. His name first was codename Andrei and then Hans. He was at one time Dutch artist, Brazilian merchant, Yugoslav seasonal worker, American businessman, British Lord Sir Robert Grenville. He had a genuine passport, and I described how he was able to pull it off to get the genuine passport. American gangster Joe Pirelli. He spread the myth that he's a gangster, and sometimes it worked. It helped him to get a passport at one point by trading. And Hungarian Count Lajos Joseph Pirelli, actually one of the covers that he used when working in Great Britain. He was also a Swiss businessman, some other operation, and he had the passport also of the Austrian citizen Joseph Sverma. And here's a Greek merchant, Alexander Gallus. And that's what's interesting for anyone, for specialists, or especially today, we will talk about how illegals make themselves disappear when they come into a foreign country. Probably the most detailed record that I have researching his work, how he became a Greek merchant Gallus. First of all, how he got the passport is another story, I don't have time. But when he settled in Berlin, look at this, he didn't know Greek language at all. He knew many, but not Greek, okay? Now, he came and claimed himself that he's a Greek merchant. Why he doesn't know Greek? Because he basically was growing up in America, in Brooklyn. And I'm sorry, I forget the name of the language of my ancestors is not with me anymore. Alas, alas, okay? Now, when he was in Berlin, he made friends all over places where Greek shops were. He went to the Greek Orthodox churches and made friends there as well. Some students who went back to Athens, let's say, for a vacation, he asked them, please send me a postcard from my motherland. And they sent him, so he had it placed in his apartment in case counterintelligence comes over. They say, oh, this guy is really Greek. I mean, everything is Greek around him and so on. That's how he actually, it's not a surprise that later on, I'm jumping a little bit forward, Bystrolyodov wrote one of the first manuals for the KGB. In Russian it's called Konspiratsiya, means how to penetrate and disappear and become illegal in another country, which means to use. He was considered to be an expert in this. As I showed only one of them briefly, I say, but there are many others. Now, this is briefly maps. I mean, the stars. You see the countries where he spied against. Most of them just diplomatic ciphers and codes. Some of them intelligence, industrial espionage, and so on. Now, his major operation, smuggle. He was given a lot of documents to smuggle because he was so high-class society man. Often the border guards had problems talking to a British lord, so they would let him go. So he was always, he writes about 100 times he took over documents across the border. Now, he also found a man who Stalin's order was given to find a man who brought Italian ciphers for sale and was by mistake kicked out from the Soviet embassy. The only thing was known about him, he had a tip of his nose was red. And when Bystrolyodov said to Slutsky, who gave him this order, how can I find? There are zillions of people like that. He says, look, if we could find without you, we would not ask you. You have 6 months and as much money as you want, but find him. He found him in 4 months. All by sheer logic. When he talked about him, he told me this sheer logic, but then I described in detail his search, how he did it in one of the chapters. And this is British agent, one of probably celebrated cases for which he was given a personal award as a personal gun with inscription is Ernest Oldham. He was an employee, British Foreign Office employee, who actually volunteered to give to the Soviets these ciphers and codes and so on. But he was not handled properly before. In other words, he wanted to become very independent. And so Bystrolyodov was brought in to help Bazarov to take hold of him and do him what they want, not what he wants. Again, it's a long story, almost 3 chapters devoted on this one. But finally, he was able to succeed and receive order. Now, this is something that I couldn't believe until I picked up some other literature. I never heard of it, but when I talked to Bistryotov, he told me that he intercepted special delivery correspondence between Hitler and someone around his Mussolini's staff, and I couldn't figure out who, something very close to him. Only going through the research, I found who was the man. He was Count Constanzo Ciano Sr., the father of the Minister of Foreign Affairs under Mussolini. And why? At first I thought that Ciano himself. No, Ciano really didn't like Germany. He didn't like Hitler. As a matter of fact, to my surprise, Mussolini didn't like Hitler as much. In the beginning, he felt that that Hitler is just some little man who just repeats parts of Mein Kampf like a spoiled gramophone, record. That's how he talked about him. But later on, of course, mutual interest brought them together. It was one time even we know there was a military confrontation track on the side of Mussolini when Hitler planned to overtake Austria for the first time. So this is the man, and he used, as in many other operations, as a sex bait, this lady, who Bistryotov writes she was German Countess Margaret Brandau-Franzau. Brandau-Franzau, a very famous name in the history of Russia, for those who knows, who helped to, with the operation sending out Lenin through Germany in sealed car wagon in order to unstabilize Russia at the time of war. But I don't know, I did thorough research. I doubt that this woman was not an imposter. I don't know who she was, but this is her picture. But pictures were found in his personal archive. In the year is 1930, and my guess is that that's when he met her. He also stole 4-year plan of rearmament of Germany by seducing, I think there's nothing like that I ever read even in spy novels. He seduced a woman who was considered to be unseducible. Is it inseducible, whatever it is, right? Impossible. She was disfigured from birth. Half of her face was burned because as a child, so it was, and she was appointed to secure some secrets of the industrial military complex of Nazi Germany at the time, because they thought nobody would ever seduce this woman. And Bistryotov did it, and I have to tell you, high class. How he was able to do it. The only parallel I can see, like in karate, sometimes you use the strength of your adversary against him. That's what he did. Her strength was, or should I say passion, she was Nazi to the last bone, obviously bitter because of her personal hand and so on. So he used her, that particular quality, in order to bring him to him. How he did it, read in the book. We don't have much time, unfortunately. Now, he also provided the, at that time already NKVD, with a list of German military intelligence agents in France. There were French sympathizers of Nazis in France at that time, and there was an operation through certain bank records, find a way or transfer of bank information to find the names of these people. Again, why they would want it to do. This is something I discovered based on Bistryotov own comments and his writing. That something that I never read, I think only specialists know, that because of that complexity of the situation, Hitler coming to power, what would happen to the Western Front and Eastern Front? France needed some support, obviously. Would Soviet Union be potential adversary? Yes, there was one talk, or at least one foreign minister of France at that time said, yes, we may provide support if Hitler strikes out, we have to join, things like that. Whether it was really in real record or not, I don't know. I only know that Bistryotov writes that's why he was sent. That's why all these seemingly French targets were necessary for the Soviets at the time, because Soviet Union also didn't know, despite whatever was officially, how things will turn. Remind you, this is still before Hitler-Ribbentrop Pact. Stalin's still thinking how he can use it. So he needed all this information. And So that's the number of operations. Now, this is one of the most outstanding operations simply from the point of view of bravery of it, of the risk he took. He and a group of other Soviet agents, spies, which were operatives, say we have a difference in terminology, they received an order to take the last samples of new anti-craft machine gun, Italian, that was used already and started a war with Abyssinia, and gas protection gear. I want to remind you that after World War I, there was a fear everywhere in Europe that gas will be used again. And this including Soviet Union, we know from other movies, they always carried with them. So they wanted to know what Italians have. So the group of Soviet operatives got this sample in Rome, and they took it by train through border with Switzerland, then through border with Germany to Berlin to underground specialists who examined it. They found it would be easier to do it than going otherwise. Again, why? All details are in the book, the whole chapter about it. Now, how they pulled it off. They disassembled the machine gun and made believe that this is just a collection of clubs for golf. The man traveling is British lord, who is dangerously sick with all kinds of mad movement. You don't rattle him because he may bite even, you know. So there is a nurse next to him, there is a doctor coming checking him, and they take all this luggage, the gas protection gear in a suitcase, and they take it all through these old borders. And Mr. Rudder writes that at one point I felt if anybody would just simply not be that scared of handling this mad British lord and just try to look at this, because what they have problem, one of the muzzle of the gun was too high, and that didn't quite look as a club. But what did they know about people who at that level didn't know much about the golf, and that's what they used. So in other words, they took extreme risk, and then they pulled off this operation. Now, briefly, and after that, he was sent to Africa, and for one reason, to investigate. First of all, there was some of his military intelligence about the material that were important. I'm jumping. Material that was important, war materials in Congo. That means wolfram for producing steel and so on. Plus, as a French foreign intelligence, foreign affairs minister promised that in case of troubles in Europe, France will promise to bring from French and Belgian Congo 100,000 mercenaries. So Mr. Loder writes, I was given a test to find out is it feasible or not, or it's just bluff. Well, his resolution after that, it was bluff. When he saw really the conditions, he spent half a year there. When he saw conditions on the ground, he said, no, it's impossible. But here, again, I want to remind you that he was a talented artist, and that the sketches he did while traveling through Africa. He had some other, but I thought this one would probably be interesting. And this is in the ink, and this is gouache. And then after that, he took part only in one operation, Romanian diplomatic and military secrets. The agent was Florica Titulescu. She was a French spy. Soviet intelligence knew that she was working for French. And she was a lover of one of the generals of the general staff in Romania. And she provided documents of the Romania. Again, Romania also, they didn't know with whom they would stick. With Nazi Germany or with the Soviet Union. There were complex political and military kind of conditions on the ground. To the last moment they didn't know. Well, the rest we know how. I'm Russian. And then back in 1936, shortly after he comes back, he's refused to go back, but finally they allow him. He's arrested. This is the order of his arrest. This is how he looked, in his mugshots. He's brought first to Butyrka prison for questioning. This is how it looks close by, if you're curious. This is Butyrka prison. inside of the Turco prison. Then finally they brought him to Lubyanka and said, okay, enough is enough, you have a choice. Either you write your testimony in ink or in your own blood. You have 24 hours to decide. After much thinking, he finally decided no, he cannot lie that he is a spy for 6 countries, whatever they want him to write. And in the Fortover, he is tortured, and we don't have time to explain, to give a detail how he was tortured. Just very, I have to say, I was amazed that he survived all of this. But mind you, he was 6 foot tall. He was a sailor for a number of years, as a young man. He was a very sturdy man. He survived on sheer his physical endurance. And then the last one I want to show you, he was beaten with this steel bearing, put on a steel cable, and was beaten over his back until it broke down, and some of the balls lodged in his rib cage. And he was sentenced to 20 years, and he's taken to, as you see, from Moscow first to Krasnoyarsk, then to one of the harshest places, Norilsk, in the beyond polar circle. He spent a year there. That's how it looked like in the winter. And this is the job he had to do, just doing ditches there. Then, after a year, he was written off after operation to invalid camp. He's coming to invalid camp to Omsk, down there, and where he starts to write his memoirs. Now, the writing was not forbidden in Gulag, but there was shortage of paper and shortage of ink. So what you see, he wrote with iodine. Since he had some some medical training, he had access to iodine. So he wrote on iodine, and that's what you see is either used iodine in order to write his memoirs. Then in 1947, and I will probably end at this, is that he is all of a sudden, mind you, after 9 years already in Gulag, he's brought back to Moscow and offered amnesty in exchange for giving some information that would help them to put in jail one other operative. Now we're talking about the purges of the World War II, after World War II period in Stalin. He refuses, saying, no, if I accept amnesty, it means I admit that I was a traitor to the country, you just simply let me go. No. Either you fully rehabilitate me after examining my case, and then we can talk, or I don't comply. And they put him in Sukhanovka, which was one of the harshest prisons in the Gulag. This is just a quote from Archipelago Gulag about it. This is the very name of it was used as a threat when they interrogated of the prisoners. And again, we don't have time, it's all in the book, how he was, what kind of methods they used in order to pressure this 3 years of confinement, mind you. For 3 years he didn't see anyone but the guard who would bring him food, and at some point he refused to, hunger strikes, couple and so on and so forth. And this is his physical kind of impairment. And then, after that, Sukhanovka is near Moscow, he's brought back again to Gulag, to another camp. And this is the whole kind of illnesses, his down the drain goes his health. He makes 2 suicide attempts, and I have to say, I couldn't believe the power of this man. He could not, he was paralyzed, half of his body was paralyzed. So he tried to make a nook out of the linen he was lying on, but it was very difficult. So he started to train his hand and train it. Finally, he was able to do it, only to realize, hey, if after 2 weeks of doing it, I was able to, why then commit suicide? I can get back to my medical assistant job, in the prison, and so on. That's how he canceled it. And so this is how he looked when he was released. Now, there is something I wanted to end with, I'm pretty much American. Half of my life I spent in America. I have to end on some lighter note. In the camps, he met a woman. She was a prisoner. By the way, remember I told you about ink? Iodine, actually? When she came, she was one of his patients. He was a medical assistant then. And she was very tired. She thought that she had a heart problem. She picked up this little glass and she drank it. And because she thought some medicine. And he was very mad at her because, this is writing material and so on. Anyway, the love affair started and they became inseparable to the last days of their life. When he came out of this, half paralyzed, and he thought she never would take him back. She said, no, I want you to be with me for the rest of my life. And I have to say, he writes about her only with one word, dear Anya, Anichka. There is no other word for her. That's how much he felt for her great love. Needless to say, and this is his old love affairs, what he heard for, he was personally the most unhappy man I ever met. So much of it, to begin with, he was married to a woman who was bipolar, and bisexual. Is it not enough? Okay, you can add whatever. So what I'm trying to say, if you think you have a problem in your marriage, think again. If you think you have a problem with your parents, think again after you read the story of Mr. Redder. Thank you for your attention.
We've got time for just a few questions, and I would add that Emil's going to sign books, and you can meet him and perhaps chat with him afterwards as well. But we have time for a couple questions. Surely there was one somewhere.
I was just curious, so you talk about how he was spying for Russia. Why all of a sudden did he become kind of an enemy of the state and they decided to arrest him?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I have to say something again, personal. Despite so many years, half of my life I lived in America. But still, when you come from Russia, and I spent my first 36 years in Russia, 35 years, I don't think that I should explain why Stalin would persecute somebody like him. It's a very logical question from American point of view. But growing up in Russia, you say, what else is new? There are so many of them. But here's my answer, true answer, why. Some Americans think, oh, he was just paranoid, Stalin, and so on. Yeah, he was paranoid later on in his life. Here there was one important issue. Stalin wanted to replace people who are devoted to the ideals of revolution, to his personal loyalty to him, period. Therefore, we know that Stalin destroyed the old Bolsheviks, guards, right? Because they were Leninists. In other words, they believed in the ideals of revolution. If you believe in this revolution, you will always buy what Stalin offers, correct? That's what we know now, that Stalin had plans of finally probably capturing the whole Europe with the industrial complex he was building in through demonstrating through industrialization, the tractors and then tanks and so on and so forth. We know it now. At that time, nobody knew. Bystrolyodov, like many others, thought if only Stalin knew what's going on in the country, he would stop it. So many of them. Solzhenitsyn writes in his book about the so-called kontriki, or the righteous communists. There are so many of them that believe that the revolution, no, this is aberration. Only if Stalin knows. And they kept writing him letters and asking for examination and so on. And so did Bystrolyodov. But Bystrolyodov gradually came up to probably the trip, I would say, after Sukhanovka, after what happened to him. And you may be amused by his naivete. You know what he said to Abakumov in 1947 after 9 years of Gulag? What happened to me is unthinkable to happen in any cultural country. Can you imagine? After seeing what's going on, he still believed that Russia doesn't live up to his ideals, that Russia is a great country of great culture and so on and so forth. He could not grasp it. So only after that, after all of what he personally went through, he finally came to it, and then as late in 1953, with the case of the infamous plot against doctors, of Kremlin's doctors appeared, right? His reaction was what he writes in his memoirs were not published till today. This is very important, why actually what kept me writing for 7 years. Only 4 out of 11 volumes of his memoirs are published. Why the rest is not published? You understand very clearly if you know what's going on in Russia now. He writes in 1953 that the doctor's case showed that Stalinism and Nazism are the same. In Russian, dva sapaga para is the expression, right? Two boots, this one makes a pair. Okay? Stalin just needs blood for his machine. This time is the blood of Jewish people, the most cultured elite, but it doesn't matter. In other words, he was anti-Stalinist by the end of his imprisonment, no question about it. And later on, what's important, already coming out, by the way, we didn't have time for it, the man knew, when I met him, 19 languages. 19. He worked he made money. When the KGB, when he came out, he was rehabilitated and so on, they offered him a laughing amount of pension that he couldn't live on. He made money and he simply, for 2 years they didn't want to talk to him even, not to give him anything, even his belongings. He was dressed as a British lord sometimes, right? He had a lot of expensive things when he was arrested. Now when you say that I'm not guilty, give me back what you took from me. No, it was, I had gold, ring and so on. No, there was some stuff made of copper. That's what was written. Okay, so he understood the KGB of that time. Not only they persecuted him, they destroyed his life, destroyed his family. His first wife committed suicide, his mother committed suicide. He left with nothing, okay? So he came to realize that what kind of a system it is that allows the KGB destroy somebody who was so devoted to his country, did everything in his power, risking his life and so on. So he came to understand finally that it's not just Stalin, that without Lenin there would be not Stalin. That Lenin introduced the so-called democratический centralism, the democratic centralism, which was a cover-up for dictatorship later on, and so on. So he wrote things that were unthinkable, unacceptable, and unfortunately, till today. Because no matter how much effort his step-grandson takes in order to publish the rest of it, no publishing house in Russia wants to publish it. But you can get it online, by the way. Today, thanks to internet, he offers it online. It's simply bistroleta.ru. You can get it there for a couple of bucks.
Time for one more?
Can you talk about your psychiatrist experience?
Wait, hang on. Okay, wait first. We're recording this.
Yeah, like when you went to psychiatrist and to talk about his personality, your own.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say that Bistroleta presented tremendous problem for me as a human being, because I met the man and I could not understand what makes him thick, because so many things in his memoirs, any person we would consider, any memoirist would write. Most of our understanding would be to write something in memoir that brings you up. Oftentimes, he wrote something that definitely not. What his intention was, he was so ashamed of himself that all his life was wasted, and he was trying to understand himself why I did it, why I became a spy and then believed and so on. And he examined his own personality. Going back, he described in one of his books his ancestors' mental health from 2 generations behind. Find there was a mental instability there. He found that his mother was so obsessed with the social causes that she neglected him as a child, and he was needed. That's what I'm telling you, I understood. Motherland, okay? He understood why he reacted the way he acted. There's one scene that he described that struck me as so powerful. He was, as a sailor, the year is 1919, during Atatürk war, no, later, I think 20, Atatürk war with nationalists to free Turkey and become independent and so on. The Turkish troops were killing left and right Armenians and Greeks. They were running from them to a ship that was basically making money in the war profiteering. So one of the episodes, one of the women with a baby, a little baby, was trying to get on a boat, and the boat was completely full. But she was able to put the baby in, but one of the sailors bit her and didn't know, and she sank. And he saw the face, and he described the face of this woman so happy that at least she saved her baby. It was a young Armenian woman, and he described how it and that caused a number of depression in his life. He described how later on, after everything was out, when things settled, all of a sudden he was hit with he just saw this woman. Why? And I realized, and when I talked to psychiatrists and so on, obviously, this woman was the complete opposite of his mother, who thought that social justice is more important than the well-being of your own baby. I mean, things like that. And there are a number of others that I couldn't fathom even how this happened. So obviously he was psychologically a very complex man, needless to say very brave. And I have to tell you as a footnote that I was interviewed by a Russian paper, and I said that because so much still in Russian community, people who went through the similar experience, but they remained the Stalin Bolsheviks and so on. Bystrovedo, one of you I know personally, who had the courage to say, I was bowing to the wrong God. I was fooled my whole life, and he actually wrote it in his memoir. It's very hard. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think, why all of us, the Soviet intelligence operatives in the West, were ready to sacrifice our life for our country, and everything was just thrown in mud. Yes, we justified it, and this is very important. He felt guilty of the deception and destruction of lives of other people. He never killed physically, but he definitely, the British man committed suicide because of the guilt he was doing, and he was pushed doing more and so on. He felt guilty. Bystrovedo felt guilty about it. And he wrote, actually, every day in the camp I said to myself, that serves me right. That serves me right not because he was innocent toward Soviet Union, but he felt he couldn't have it. So he ends this quotation with the words, it's very hard to find yourself at the end of your life, ended with zilch. In Russian, остаться у разбитого корыта. That's the most powerful statement ever been made. Okay? For that alone, he definitely deserves respect. Thank you.